Today is our advanced training on pensions, data assumptions, and projections. I'm Nancy Chauso Schaefer. I am a family law attorney for more than 40 years practicing in Chicago area. And I'm joined today also by Anna Tate, my colleague at Family Law Software. So I am going to share my screen. During this presentation, we are more than happy for you to have questions and ask them in our chat or Q&A. So please do that. I'm sure that you have lots of questions about the pensions, data assumptions, and projections. We have a lot to cover today, so hopefully we will get through it all. And if not, we'll do another one sometime soon with what we didn't get to. Okay, so let's talk first about pensions. So in Family Law Software, you can go to the Enter Data section of the program, and I'm showing you the cloud version of Family Law Software. And if I go into Enter Data, I have assets and liabilities. I happen to be working in the Illinois version of the program, but this would go for any of the programs. In assets and liabilities, one of the entries is going to be defined benefit pensions. And you can see I have one already entered. Or we have a separate page just for pensions. So it's the same data, it's the same exact thing, it's just a quicker way to get to the pension screen. So I'm going to open the section for defined benefit pension, and I have one in here already. I'm going to add a second one just so that we can see from the beginning how to create and work with the pension information. So let's call this the Big Wig pension. And it is going to be Blake's. And now we already have Blake's retirement age. It was one of the facts that I've entered into the program. And then I can either enter this data here, the front page data, or I can go into more information. And I've checked the box to use the software's value of the plan. If I have an outside valuation, then I would just check the box for an outside valuation and put the value in here and you're done. However, that would be a very short seminar today. So we're going to use the software's value. And right now there's no information, so the value is 0. And you can see that this field, the calculated value, has turned blue, meaning it is a calculated value, as opposed to yellow, which is a data entry field. So now I'm going to click on more information. It's the green box with the 3 dots. And I'm going to start to put in pension value information. So this is going to be a pension for Blake. And so the program already knows that Blake is male. For pension valuation purposes, there is only male or female. There are no gender neutral mortality tables. Binary mortality tables. There are gender neutral tables. I misspoke there. So now we have the age at which participant will retire, and the program automatically gives me the date. If I put in the date, so if I said it would be on 2061, it's going to change the years. If I change the years and say it's going to be 67 and 6 months, it's going to automatically change the date. So those two fields interact. Now we have the next field is the benefit amount. So the benefit amount you're usually going to get from the plan administrator. And the defined benefit plans are required to give an annual statement with certain information. If the party doesn't have those statements because they didn't save them, then you can get them generally from the plan administrator. Or you can just use an estimate. And throughout the program, you will, of course, see the little question marks in the blue circle, which is our help button. So if I click on that help button, and the software will calculate an estimate if data is entered on the estimate screen. So I can click on this link, and that this will give me the ability to estimate the monthly value, benefit value. So you would just go through and put in all of these dollar amounts. And this is really good for the plans that for whatever reason you don't have an estimate, or you want to see what the monthly benefit will be, in 5 years. You can estimate a compensation amount and so on. So this is for the formula kinds of benefit estimates. And you can put in up to 6 years of calculation, and it will give you a benefit amount. Pretty cool feature that I actually didn't even know was in the program until a couple of months ago when I was working with someone on a pension value. Now, the next piece of information is the interest rate, also known as the discount rate. This is one of the pieces of information that is part of the actuarial art. This is a variable subject to the discretion of the appraiser, of the pension valuation expert, or if you're doing it yourselves, for you to decide. So we do have some help for that, and we can look at that help, and you'll see that we use a 20-year Treasury bond rate. That is considered to be, in the financial markets, a safe rate of return. We update the rate monthly in our software. If you have the desktop version, make sure that you have updated the program so you can get those updates, or just go to the Federal Reserve site and use the Federal Reserve daily rate. Now, of course, the daily rate might be different today from the rate that we are using in the cloud version of the program, which is updated monthly. But those rates move every day. So this gives you the hint of which one you want to use, and you can always just use your own rate, whatever rate you want to make up. You can also use multiple tiers of rates. If you think that interest rates are trending up or down, or up then down, you can play around with those rates too. But again, garbage in, garbage out. Normally, I don't play with those rates at all because, and we'll get to this in a minute, remember that the present value of a pension plan is basically a mythical number. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So here we've got several pieces of information we've put in. We've put in the birth date, or that was already in the program in the data that I entered under parties and children. The gender, again, you can only choose male or female for mortality tables. The age at which the participant will retire, obviously that can be an estimate unless you're absolutely sure. I'm going to put this back to 67. We used to say 65. The Social Security retirement age, the normal retirement age for Social Security, not early or deferred, is 67 now. So we're going to use that number. And now let's put in a benefit amount. I'm just going to put in an amount, $2,300. That's what the plan administrator said. Now the current interest rate, 4%, I'm going to just leave that. the program allows me to put in a COLA percentage, a cost of living adjustment percentage. And so I'm going to use our, we'll just say a 1% COLA every year. And that is going to be compounding. If I wanted to use a simple rate as they do in California for CalSTRS, I would check the box here. But it's very easy to change that, and it will make a difference in the value. So you can see if I check the box, the value went to 89,000. If I uncheck it, the value went to 89,748. So it changes. We don't have a lot of years going forward. So see, so the retirement date is 2060. Now, the next piece of information is another variable that is part of the art of the actuarial, or they call it actuarial science, but really it's an art. It's not exactly science because there are some guesstimates or assumptions that are made. One of them is the discount rate. The second is the mortality table. So we have a number of mortality tables built into the program. You should probably know which one or ones are accepted in your state. We have some information about them. We're not turning you into actuaries. And again, remember, mythical number. So let's look at the information about each table. We have a little description of each table next to the name of it. If you click on the little question mark, it'll give you a little more information. And we also have this more information link, which will take you to a page which will describe each mortality table and just a little more information about them. So not every single one, but most of them are in that list. And then this is important, the date to evaluate the plan. So typically you would use today's date. If I click on the link under evaluate, it will tell me some information about the evaluation date. So as a general rule, the later the date, the higher the value, because there will be less discounting. Oftentimes, the evaluation date will be the date that employee benefit statement was issued. So the benefit amount and the evaluation date match, but it doesn't have to. And again, we're dealing with a mythical number, so we'll just keep going. And now you get a pension value. And that pension value is a present value. What does that mean? Well, it's taking all of these assumptions and putting them into the math of the program. And I'll show you later the audited report that'll show you exactly what the program is doing. But essentially, that is sort of like an offset value that you might use. This is 100%. This would not be the value if a portion of the plan was separate or non-marital. So let's look at the date that this person started in the plan. Let's make it before the date of marriage. So let's say that he started 9/1/2005, okay? And the date they were married was 2009. And now we have to put in a cutoff date. When is it going to be no longer marital? This will depend on your state's laws. In Illinois, it technically would be the date of dissolution or the date of judgment. But that's sometimes there is a room in our statute to vary that. In some states, it's a separation date. So let's just say it's going to be 6/1/2022. Okay. And now, whoops, what did I just do? 6/1/2022. And now you can see that the coverture fraction is 77.96. The line 14 here, the benefit amount assumes the participant works until what date? That is going to, you're going to either match the language on the pension benefit statement from the administrator, or you can make it the retirement date or the cutoff date. So the cutoff date is the date on line 13. The retirement date will be the date on line 3. Okay, so which date do we want to use? And now I'm just going to show you that if I change from the cutoff date to the retirement date, what happens to the coverture fraction? It goes way down because there's a longer period of time after the cutoff date when the person would still be participating and not yet retired. So it reduces the coverture fraction. I'm going to leave it as the cutoff date. That's more typical of how we use the program. But again, that's going to change the value, right? All of these things end up changing the value, and I'll show you that in a moment. So now we have the value itself, 100% is 89,748 with these assumptions. There's a 77.96 coverture fraction, meaning the amount that is marital. And so the marital amount of this 89,000 is 69,976. Let's call it 70,000. I'm just going to go back for a minute and show you the coverture fraction calculation, which you can reach with this link this link at line 15. And so this will give me the exact calculation of the coverture fraction in days, as opposed to months or years. This is very, very exact, and it will give you that information. Okay. Now let's keep going. The next part of the data entry allows you to decide who's going to get the plan. And then it will give you, we haven't allocated it. So let's say we're going to take that marital portion and divide it 50-50. So the program automatically put in the 50% for the first party and then automatically put in the second party's 50% and divided the dollar amount. And then Blake has some separate equity that we saw. That's the other 23% of the marital, of the 100% value. And now it will also show you what each party is getting at that 50-50 in terms of the mythical present value. And I call it mythical because when it comes down to it, this calculation is based on a variety of assumptions, not the least of which is that the person is going to live for the same amount of years and months that the mortality tables reflect as the average. And of course, if we knew when people were going to die, it would be very easy to come up with a valuation. And we don't know what that is. And it also uses the assumption of the interest rate. So remember that this value, even though it's a dollar amount that we've come to, is really a projection or assumption based on the data that was entered and is not a real number. So somebody could die the day after they retire and they would actually receive 0 from their plan, right? no payments. But that doesn't change the fact that at the time of the divorce, the plan was valued at $89,000 or whatever the value is. So it is not a real number. It is a projection or assumption of a number. Now, when we look at the benefit payments, I'm going to go into the reports page to more reports, and I'm going to change our projections out 50 years, because that's going to allow me to see the information on the payments that each party is going to receive. And so here at line 26, we can say, what is this going to look like for each party if, rather than offsetting it for another asset, we just look at what the pension is going to bring to them. Now we go in and we see the pension starts in 2062. And that being said, so 2062 is a partial year. And then here we have the first full year, but there's a COLA. So each year it's going to go up. And this first set is Taylor's payments. And then we have Blake's payments. And Blake's payments, you'll see, are higher because Blake has a non-marital portion of this plan as well. So he's going to be getting more money than Taylor. He's going to get his 50% of the marital portion plus his non-marital portion. And because I have a COLA, that worked into it. I see we have a couple of questions. If the client plans to work another 20 years, why would you not use the retirement date? Okay, Anna, you want to answer that? Do I have to unmute you? Anna.
Hey, Nancy, I would think you would use the retirement date.
Yeah, so the question really is, what value are you looking to get? Who are you representing? What is the parameters? What are the parameters of what they're seeking to achieve by looking at a present value of the pension? And in some ways, if you use the retirement date, you also have to use what the payment would be at the retirement date. So oftentimes the plan will give you in that statement, if you retire now, this is your benefit. If you work till retirement age, this is your benefit. And so you have to use the right number for both of those things. I think that's really the key. Okay. All right. Now, so the interest rate for Illinois, TRS, and IMRF, you can use, and for any plan, you can use the plan administrators' percentages and what they use for interest rate. Sometimes, though, you have to remember that the plan is often geared to benefit the employee. So those statements and so on are geared for the employee and not for the spouse. And we're only coming up with a mythical value anyway. So you want to be careful about which one you use. I have another question. If the pension allows for the creation of a separate interest for the non-participant spouse, separate interest, I'm going to leave that for any pension experts out there. Generally speaking, separate interests are for defined contribution plans, not for defined benefit plans. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit in a while about the defined benefit plan. So now we've got all of the information in here. We have a value. I'm gonna go to the other pension plan in this file. Go back to enter data, pension plans. So I'm going to go to the first plan, which has a little more information, a little bigger value. And we're going to go down to the report and audit trail. So this is where you're going to get the information. So we have two reports. We have a pension valuation report, which is easier to read. You can provide it to the client, to the attorney, to the judge. It is an understandable document for the most part. It's still numbers, and some of us just, freak out at numbers. But one thing that I also use this plan for, and by the way, this plan is report number 22 on the reports, more reports, and then I'll go down to report 22 for the pension valuation report. And so here's that same report that we were just looking at. And what I like to do sometimes is just look at this report to check my data, to check my facts. Did I put in the right information? And so this just runs through all of that information, and it's a good double check that you put in the right birth date, you put in the right marriage date, so on and so forth, because that is going to change your value, of course. So this report gives you all the key information. Now we do have a second report. Let's go back into enter data, pension plans, more info. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and I have an audit trail report. This audit trail report is going to be the one that makes your eyes roll back into your head, but it gives you all of the math of how the present value was calculated. And if you ever want to really understand this pension valuation, if you read all of this report and follow it along, you will find that either you are totally lost or the light bulb clicks on and you now get how to value pension plans and how the valuation works. It took me reading it about 20 times for the light bulb to kick on. It's not easy reading. And then if you notice down here at H, we have further information, and we have a whole bunch of help menus and screens to give you some nice, helpful information about the plan and the pension plan values. Okay. So that is the pension plans. There's a couple of other things I want to point out about it. For example, the coverture fraction is sometimes used in other contexts. So it's easy to just put in enough information to get that coverture fraction to work. I know in some states and some of my fellow practitioners have used the coverture fraction to figure out how to split RSUs or stock options that vest in the future, but were granted during the marriage. That's not necessarily the way to do it, but some people do it that way. And remember that the coverage fraction will change if you change the cutoff date. That fraction is also useful to put into your quadro if you have a plan that will take percentages. Now, we do have an event coming up that my colleague Anna Tate is going to be part of on quadros, Anna's going to put the information in the chat if anybody is interested in knowing more about that. I'm going to now go to talk about 401k plans and other defined contribution plans. So if anyone has any more pension questions, you can put them in the chat, but we're moving on to the other topics. So here you'll see we have a couple of retirement plans, 401k plans, but they could be IRAs or 457Bs or any other kind of defined contribution plan. And if I click on the more information screen for the plan, there's a bunch of information we can put in. So the first is, whose account is that? So let's say this one is Taylor's, and I'm not putting whose financial affidavit it will be listed on because I really want it to be both, and that'll be the default setting. We ask here whether the account is an IRA, a Roth, 401k or IRA, or an after-tax 401k. And then if you have 529 plans, this would be where you enter them as well, because they are treated tax-wise differently, more like a retirement plan. And then you can put in information, valuation date, typically is important. I like to put it in because when I'm then updating information later in the case may have been pending a year or 2 years, or God forbid, 3 years. And it helps me to know if this is something I need to update. So let's assume I got this information from the 2021 end of year statement. So I know here we are in October, I might want to update this information. We have a couple of questions. Okay. A plan that has a COLA only on a specified amount of the benefit, modeling that using FLS. It's a little too advanced for this, given the fact that we have so many participants, but if I have time, I'll go back and show you that. Okay, so now we have the value of the account today. And if there's any lien or loan against that value, you would put it in here at line 13. Excuse me. And I'm putting a projected growth rate of 5%. You know what? I should be so lucky. But now we can put in separate values. If any portion of this is separate property, we can only do it by 100% or a dollar amount. We can't do it by percentages. So, and figuring out the non-marital value is a whole topic in and of itself that people struggle with regularly. I have hired experts to do that. And I don't always agree with their methodology, but it gives me a number to work with. So now we are at the who gets what of this plan. I'm saying that 100% of it is being kept by Blake. And in the data entry, we have the ability to put in the annual contributions, either by dollar amount or by percentage. And we have both parties because we don't know, we have the information for both parties there, but of course, a plan, a defined contribution plan is only one party's plan. Now let's look at distributions. So the program can automatically do some distributions from the account, and that will go into the projections that we're going to talk about next or later after we do assumptions. So we've got regular retirement distributions. And so are there going to be regular distributions? We can automatically calculate what's called the RMD, the required minimum distribution, RMD. And, or we can say that it's going to be distributed as a percentage or a certain dollar amount each year, or the whole thing is going to get distributed when they're retired. And if that's the case, or we're going to do it over a number of years. So, if we want to do it over the next 20 years, you would put that in there. There is a provision in the law for accounts to be paid out over a period of years and avoid the penalty in certain circumstances for early distribution. So that would be automatic. And then we have a section for a current year early distribution. So what that's going to do is if you're going to cash out a plan, it's going to automatically add the penalty and the tax if they apply. And we'll ask you a whole bunch of questions. Is it a qualified home or for college or any other exemption under the law? If you click on the word provision here, we have a description of all the exceptions to penalty for early distribution of a defined contribution plan. So that being said, if there were going to be annual distributions, you would be able to see them here if you go out enough years. And here again, this IRA is being distributed in a certain way with the required minimum distributions. So that will be effective for early distributions. And if you have one of these exceptions, it'll eliminate the 10% penalty. Okay, so that's our defined contribution accounts. Now, I think we have one more question. Oh, no, that's the same question. Okay, so then we've got, I want to talk about assumptions. So the program is able to do projections. It's able to do, has a great tax engine to take taxes into account. What are the assumptions? What's going on behind the scenes that could impact your results on those things? And this is important to understand. So I'm going to go through it, but everything is here in the program for you to look at and review. So if I go into settings, you'll see I have a page called assumptions. And that page labeled assumptions and settings starts out with assumptions and then goes to some information that's set. Okay. I can also get to that same page by going into reports, more reports. And if I go on the lawyer's page, I can go to assumptions there. And it's the exact same report. So these assumptions are program-wide. These are default assumptions. You can change them. So let's look at them in order. The first one is the start year. The start year sets the tax year for child support and for any tax calculations for the first year. If I change this, let's say to 2021, it's going to use the 2021 tax year for support. And then also when I go into like the view edit taxes report, it can start at 2021. When you open a new file, you are always going to be in the current year. And the only other time I change the start year is if I am trying to do a support calculation for a prior year or I guess maybe for a future year, but we obviously don't know what the income will be in the future. So the start year will be for past years. So if I had a case recently where we had to go back and look at support in 2017, 18, 19, and 20 and 21. Luckily, by then I finished the case in 21, although it was December. I did a version of the file for each year, so I could enter in the income information and have the support be accurate for each year. So I changed the start year, and then I went to File Manager and made a copy of the report. So each year became a different file. So I had the 2021 file, the 2020 file, the 2020, the 2019 file, 2018 file. Keep in mind, though, that this may not always be sticky. So if you change it and don't do a save as, you want to check that. And when you open a new file, it won't use a prior year. It will always be the current year for a new file. The next selection here, the next data entry, is the number of years for all of your projections. You can go from 1 to 50 years. Right now, we already looked at this before in the pension situation, for looking at when the data was going to, or the payments were going to be made. Let's do this for 10 years now, because I want to show you some things on the assumptions later. Now, the last year for personal tax provisions of the 2017 Tax Act, we put that in because there was a lot of discussion at the time of the TCJA that's the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2017, that the personal tax provisions would sunset, but Congress would extend them. So here we are in 2022 going into 2023, no telling what Congress will do, or even who will be in Congress next year. So don't change that, but just know that it's there. And if the Congress acts, we will make changes. Now, the next item is number 4, is inflation rate. Now, some of you may look at this and say, 2.4%, are you crazy? We know that inflation currently is sitting at, I think they said 8.7%. You hear a bunch of different numbers, but that is a 1 year, year-over-year inflation rate. If you click on the question mark, you'll see that we are using an inflation rate of 2.4%. Why? This is updated once a year. It is based on the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, projections of inflation for the next 10 years. So I would assume that the CBO will be changing their assumptions when they get around to it. But for right now, it's at 2.4%, believe it or not. That's actually the goal of the government, and why the Fed keeps raising interest rates, to bring the inflation rate down to 2.4. Next, we have the default mortgage interest rate. This is the rate that the program will use if you do not put a rate in when you put in a mortgage. So if I click on the question mark, you'll see it tells you that. If you create a mortgage but do not enter a mortgage interest rate, this is the rate that'll be used. And again, that's updated periodically. I think it's time for another update, but this is a 30-year fixed rate, and it's updated monthly. So I assume when we get to November, that rate is going to go up because interest rates for mortgages have gone up. Now, the next items on the assumptions page, new assets and debts are allocated 50-50, or new assets are allocated according to title. Numbers 6 and 7 on this page are actually exactly the same as the options. If you go into enter data, assets and liabilities, and look at the data entry options for this page and go down to number 3, here is the default percentage to one party, and therefore the other percentage to the other party. So the standard is no default. If you always want your files to allocate 50-50 or by title, you can go into the assumptions and change them. But generally I use no default and then just let use the tools to figure out who's going to get what. Okay. See if I can get back to assumptions this way. No, it doesn't want to let me. Okay. Back to assumptions. So I usually leave these unchecked. Again, you can do as you will. And if you go into the help menu, it will explain that. Next is report column headings. You know, we're used to often using husband and wife, but that doesn't fly anymore. So a couple of years ago, we changed the program so that we are using initials. And, you know, even that is something that is a question. So we use the party's initials. If their initials are the same, and that happens, then we use the first 5 letters of the party's first names. If they have the same initials and the same first 5 letters of their first names, then we'll call them party A and party B. But you can make whatever changes you want here, and then the program will use it in all the screens as the column headings. So that is often helpful. And so you can change it. If instead of TIM, I wanted Taylor and Blake, I could do that. Okay. So I can go up to 5 letters in there by default, but now I'm going to change them back. Again, as you know, when you overwrite something, you can go back to the original by just deleting the overwriting and it'll go back. The next section here on this assumptions page is rates of return and borrowing costs. So these settings are for the return on accumulated savings and future borrowing. It doesn't affect the return on the current assets or liabilities. You specify those on an asset by asset base when the asset, where you enter the asset. But this will be on accumulated savings and accumulated borrowing to cover excess spending in future years. So these defaults, if you click on the question mark, will tell you how we got to the defaults, and you can change them, of course, but they are the program-wide assumptions for accumulated savings and borrowing to cover excess spending going forward. The next part of this assumptions page talks about a partial initial year. So generally speaking, the program is going to look at annual numbers and it will annualize numbers for you. But sometimes that might be wrong if you're starting, let's say, a maintenance or support payment in the middle of the year, or they're starting a job in the middle of a year. So you can apply a partial year, but this will only apply to items after you set the partial year. So you can select this But be careful because in some places it'll annualize things. So you want to be careful about using it and make sure that there's no anomalous data that you didn't expect. On our assumptions page, we also have state and local taxes, provincial because we also do Canada, although I don't think there's anybody from Canada on this call. So I can click on the link, state tax rates for the parties. And here we are in Illinois. Illinois has a single flat tax rate, and we have an exemption for the individuals. Okay, so we have a state exemption, a single tax rate. We also in Illinois have some particular provisions that exclude certain items from state tax. So we have this selection in the Illinois version as you select Illinois that allows me to say what is and isn't going to be excluded from state taxes. So in our case, retirement income is excluded, Social Security income is excluded. So we're going to leave that. And sometimes there's a maximum to exclude for higher income parties. So in very particular cases, you may need to get down in the weeds there if you want to be truly accurate. Not every state has that same selection. So if, for example, I change this from Illinois to California, I was going to say Florida, but Florida doesn't have a state tax. So if we go down here, state tax rates for the parties in California, we don't have anything excluded, but there's different tax rates depending on filing status and income. So this gives you all of that information. Okay. Now we get into some things that are going to affect the projections as well, covering liquidations and future down payments. So we have some alternatives, some selections there. So how do you want to work? If we're talking about down payments for homes to be purchased in the future, what do you want to use? Do you want to use savings? Do you want to use financial investments? Or do you want to do a distribution from a retirement account? And the same thing for expenses in excess of income. What order do you want to liquidate things? So do you want to use savings, financial investments, IRAs? Yes, no, can exclude anything. If there's taxable gain, we cover the anticipated tax. It's estimated because there will be some changes in tax law and so on. So it's an estimated number. Okay, and based on what income will be in those years. So those are the main assumptions. You'll see at the bottom here, we have places for additional information. So I can specify the term to be used for alimony. Alimony can be called maintenance, spousal support, or just alimony, or I don't know, blood money. But we have three alternatives here. We don't have blood money as an alternative. So you can decide what you want it to be called in your program. It does change based on your state. So for our purposes in Illinois, we have spousal maintenance. Okay. And then we have some case information, and this will carry forward into other places where these fields exist, like case number and case name, that will, and the court, that will carry over into your forms and into some of the, like the affidavit form. Okay, so that is assumptions. We are 5 more minutes. So I'm going to talk about projections. So now you've set all of these items. And we need to look at what are you going to do with all these wonderful settings? What's going on? So let's go to the reports. So some reports, like let's say a budget report, can go out into future years. So based on the assumptions that you entered, I wanted to show you one other thing. First, when you are entering the data on an asset, a debt, an income, or an expense, you are also going to be putting in these projection items. So if we go into income and expense, and I go to, let's say, a wage, let's go to wages for Blake, and I go into more info, one of the settings is at what rate do you think Blake's wages will increase each year until retirement? So I can say not at all, same as inflation, at a rate of X% for X number of years, and then level off or end if they're retired. So you can make any of those assumptions. When you do that, so that's income, you could do the same thing for expenses. If I go into an expense, let's go to just any expense. I go into more income, and then I can say increase the expense with inflation or at some other rate. And that allows me to take into account the increases that would be natural in an expense. And the same would go for assets and debts. So if I'm doing an asset, let's look at an investment account. There are assumptions that we can put in about what's the annual income from this asset or annual rate of return, the annual rate of appreciation, and that then allows me to put in some information. So let's say that this income, this is going to have a 2% rate of return. So, and this is not going to appreciate, it's just a cash account, but I can look at the projected income for this asset for the 10 years. Okay. And then that income will be included in the support, for example, as income to the party to whom it's assigned. So now let's go again to reports. And I'm going to go first to the budget report and show you that here we have Blake with $54,000 of income. If I go out to 2030, we've given Blake a rate of inflation increase. So now he's at 65,483. So as you go into future years, you would see that. If you set it for no increase, then those numbers would remain the same. But that's one way of looking at what happens to the party's money going forward. We can do the same thing with view edit taxes. I can look at their tax return in future years, and you can see that the amount of income goes up, the dividends and so on will go up, and any tax law changes that are already in the tax laws will take effect. So here, Blake gets to take $58,000 of deductions in 2028. That's after the sunset of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. If we go to the current year and look at his total deductions, sorry, he went too fast. He only gets $19,400 of deductions. So you can see how that law impacts what we have to pay in taxes for higher income people. Okay, now also, so all of those are built in. So now if I go to more reports, we have a number of reports that would look at projections. Let's first look at graphs. These are all going to involve, or a lot of these are going to involve projections. So assets used to cover negative net income. I don't know if there is negative net income in this case. No, there's not. This is a sample file I used very high income on to show some things. But let's look at projected net income. So this is sort of the purpose for me of this projections is, how is this settlement going to work for my client? What is it going to look like going forward? So if I look at projected net income for the next 10 years, the blue is Taylor, the green is Blake. If I represent Taylor, I may not like the way this graph looks. And I may think that there might be a better settlement allocation. But if I go out more years, so let's go to more reports and change this out 50 years. And now go to that same projection. You can see that Taylor starts to go up as well after years of being close to the vest, so to speak, of not having a lot of excess. And you could look at what that means by looking at the dollar amounts in, not in the graph, but in the projection. So this is net income after expenses and taxes. If I go to the planners page and look at projected net income after expenses and taxes, it's report number 3, it will give me the dollars involved. And that's what went into the graph. And then I can see details. So I can click on the link to see the details. And boy, that's going to give me the real in the weeds, showing you all the numbers that go up and down and what they are over the course of time in the different categories. So this is, in this case, time is the vertical axis, and the different categories are the horizontal axis. So you can see with great detail what went into that spreadsheet. So I can look at, what's impacting this allocation, this end result, and what could I do in the allocation to make it better for Taylor or for Blake, as the case may be. Okay, we have gone over time. So I cannot answer that question, Mickey. That's a state-by-state legal question that I can't answer. Okay. So thank you all very much for attending this. Please provide feedback if you want. We are going to have this recorded, and it'll be on our YouTube channel. We have our website. If you go to the live training page, we have previous training webinars and a link to our YouTube channel, where you will find many of our past webinars recorded there. Thank you very much for attending today.